Marriage. When we talk about marriage, we often think of love, commitment, and personal choice. What appears to be personal and private in this modern sense is surreptitiously political and societal decision that is imposed on the individual. Uh, but the society is deluded to believe that it is something very personal. In Indian society, it is not the case because most of the marriage that exist in Indian society, those decisions are not just personal; those decisions are also familial decisions. But um, the in hindsight, it's more it's beyond even the familial choice and the personal choice. And if we look at the origins of marriage and how marriage came to be, long before marriage entered any philosophy treatise, it was already political. Long before we were discussing that something about the politicization of marriage, it was already political because we have all read that in history that and in literature that one empire used to marry their maiden daughters to the maiden sons of other empire, and it was a long phenomenon that existed in the ancient time, in the medieval time, and to some extent in the modern sense and in modern history. So, a technology of kingship diplomacy has already been there. It was already a political issue. And if we look at the timeline and if we look at the what make anything political, which means that if you look at in the one of the most ancient civilization as Mesopotamian civilization, if we look at the uh, cuneiform tablets the tablets record the royal marriages as trustees between the city and states or city states, and as which points to the fact that because of the socio-political and socio-economic conditions of two different empires, two individuals were uh, were were bonded into the matrimony of marriage just because those issues can be resolved. Sometimes, though, it was also peace treaties, or it sometimes also economical decisions. Sometimes was just because that to 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 prevent inbreeding in empires in one family that was royal, because royal were meant to only marry the royals. And one famous example of that is English royal family who ran into these issues of inbreeding, and then they started fixing it, and then they started decided they started to decide they had decided that they would marry people from the other empire, and they started marrying the people from other European countries, other European empires. So and the Sumerian code uh, of 2100 BC is among the first written laws to regulate marriage, establishing it as a contractual, publicly witnessed event, attaching legal penalties to the dissolution. So the marriage existed, but it was also made clear that there are repercussions if you don't succeed in marriage. Uh, Succeed in marriage just mean that maintaining that you are married to the other person, and probably you're not trying to treat other person and trying to take them outside the marriage and try to. So anthropologist Claude Strauss, in the Elementary Structures of Kinship, argued that the actions of women between groups, uh, what he called the atom of the kinship, which means that this exchange of women among the groups, among the tribes, among the cities, states, among the empires, it was the atom of the kingship, that it was the fundamental and elemental thing that was bringing the empires together, was bringing the groups together, and it was very important thing, and it existed in the society. And although it somehow um, um, reduce women to conveniences, which is in hindsight we can think about that, was a founding act of human society itself. Marriage on this reading was never merely personal; it was original political economy. So Claude Strauss argued that it is uh, it is not just political; it's actually a foundation of economy, because economy is meant to your economy can only function if you have a, a channel or exchange with other economies, and though that was only possible, that became more facilitated once you have women from your uh, group who are married to the people in the other group, and so it became very facilitated activity once you had that established. In ancient Egypt, pharaonic marriages sealed international peace. Ramesses' second union with Hittite princess uh, Nefertari is recorded to be the world's first non-peace treaty, the Treaty of Kadesh, which means that the first peace treaty that happened among two empires or among two major group was happened because there was supposed to be a union, a matrimonial union between two people, uh, between a princess and a king. So that's why they were able to resolve the issues, and it became a famous peace treaty. And if you look at, if you also have any idea about the literature or Greek literature in particular, if you think of Iliad, and the Iliad begins with 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 the war triggered because uh, marriage, an alliance of marriage is broken. That's why the war is, if the war is triggered and everybody is not happy with one another, and gods and immortals and mortals are ready to fight one another. So that's about it. Classical philosophy and the conjugal bond. Now we are trying to look from the perspective of classical philosophy and conjugal bond. Conjugal bond. Greek philosophy was gave the first systematic analysis of marriage. Plato kind of um, pulled this thread and tried to systemize this alliance, and he said that uh, in in the Republic, actually, in his famous work Republic, proposed the radical abolition of private marriages among the guardian class, replacing it with the temporary state-supervised union designed to produce the finest of offspring, a eugenic politics of reproduction centuries before the term existed. The so the exact quote of Plato's in the Republic is, "These women shall be without exception the common wives of these men. No one shall have a wife of his own." So Plato comes up with this radical idea, and kind of like says that private marriages uh, needs to be abolished, and people should come together, and finest women and finest men should come together, and they should reproduce offspring, and the society should take care of it. And that's also abolition of family, and it's a very radical opinion, and that it is also discussed very explicitly in the Republic or Plato's Republic. So now what Aristotle has to say about it. Aristotle, by contrast, grounded marriage in the natural tele- teleology. In the Politics, he described the household as a basic unit of polis, and the conjugal pair as its first constituted relationship, where Plato collectivized marriage. Aristotle privatized it. So Aristotle is again coming to the um, modern debate, which is that marriage is supposed to be a private union. It's not the business of anybody else to take care of who one is supposed to marry or who one should marry, and so it's not the business of others. So um, one should take care of their own marriages, and it's also a modern. It's similar to modern delusion and modern belief held by people in our society that marriage is supposed to be a private union. It is supposed to be that way, but actually it's not. Aristotle privatized the idea of marriage, yet both agreed it was inseparable from political order. The Stoic philosopher Rufus went further, arguing that the marriage was a partnership of equals aimed at mutual virtue, a remarkably progressive position that would resurface in the Enlightenment thought. So the Stoic philosopher Rufus says that it is very important to marry your equals because, and back when kings have a lot of wives and concubines, so it didn't matter who they married, who they slept with. But as uh, monogamy started to take place in the society and monogamy became a prevalent and uh, predominant kind of marriage in the world, it became more so the decision of marriage became more important and more significant because now you cannot marry numerous people. Now you are supposed to marry one person, and that one person that you're supposed to marry is better be good, better be your equal, better understands you, all those things. So it's kind of like the idea of Rufus of marrying your equal, kind of like also similar to the modern belief, and which modern belief also came from the Enlightenment era, where it became very popular that something, if you companionship and partnership is something that became a necessity, and it is understood by most thinkers that sometimes it is a union that uh, should be there in one's life. So it's more or less we have discussed uh, um, uh, the the Greek stake on marriage. Now let's come to Rome. Uh, Greeks were only they were not very big on making it everything making as a part of their constitution and as a part of order or constitution. They were trying to, but Rome did that. Rome made a part of their constitution. To do such thing is not right. Is you know they kind of like came up with all the do's and don'ts and do's and don'ts of marriage, and it's also part of some because say some say that also the part of because marriage is leads to different domains that affect the society. Romans systemized what Greek philosophized, enacted by Augustus, made marriage legally compulsory for citizens between the age of 25 and 60. So Augustus, the Emperor Augustus in Rome, made marriage legally compulsory for citizens up to the age of 25 and 60, and penalized celibacy with inheritance restriction, which means that you cannot remain celibate, and you have to get married. Otherwise, there is a penalty for it. This was This was demographic politics. Augustus needed soldiers and taxpayer after decades of needed soldiers and taxpayer after decades of civil war. And Romans were also the first who who were the first to validate a marriage, started to validate a marriage. You can think of Rome as a state rather than empire, and they started to validate the marriage, and it was the first time when state became very interested in the um, marriage of individuals, and now this is the turning point in the history of mankind because now state is interested who you marries, all not very directly, and stays it seems doesn't care, but now state is validating who is supposed to be married and who's not supposed to be married, and uh, which was explicitly a privilege of citizenship. Slaves, foreigners, certain lower classes were excluded, making marriage a marker of civic status. Slaves, foreigners, and certain lower classes were not supposed to be married. The jurist Alpine defined marriage as an individual partnership of life, establishing in law the idea that marriage was a continuing relationship, not merely a property transfer. Greek understood, and the ancient civilization of Mesopotamia, Egyptian, and probably Indian, they used to look at the marriage because there was a change of property from one place to the other. So, but you Romans made it more uh, kind of like uh, um, kind of like e- kind of pushed the weight of making a marriage more economical, but less making it more individualistic, less economical, although it remains so as well too. So establishing a law. So the direct quote from the Modestinus is marriage is the union of a man and a woman, a partnership for life involving divine and human law. So when such thing happens, when political theorists, historians, and philosophers are taking huge interest in and bureaucrats taking a huge interest in a phenomenon like marriage, uh, you know, I believe that so does literary people, and so does artists. So the poet Ovid satirized Augustan marriage laws in Arts Amatoria and was subsequently exiled, a reminder that the politics of marriage extended to artistic expression. His punishment illustrates how thoroughly the state had claimed conjugal life as its domain. The historian Tacitus observed with approval how Germanic tribes practiced strict monogamy, using their barbarian customs as a rebuke to the Roman moral decline, a strategy of using marriage norms as political critique that would recur through Western history, which is that once that Roman law was established that what marriage is, and marriage is supposed to be, business of state, and marriage is supposed to be certain way, and it should remain that way. And the more the more significant aspect of that definition of their definition of marriage was monogamy, and it exists throughout Western history for the rest of the history. It existed in Western Hemisphere. Roman law, marriage law also gave us the first sustained legal debate about consent versus coercion. The principal consensus fac facit nuptiis consent makes marriage attributed to the jurist Alpine placed intention at the center of the marital validity. This seed planted in the Roman law would flower in the medieval canon law and eventually in the liberal political theory of Locke and Kant. Uh, medieval Christian So now uh, everybody is involved in the marriage. State is involved. Now it was very difficult to keep any church out of it. So church became involved in marriage. The medieval church transformed marriage from a civil contract into a sacrament. So Roman, as far as we have understood, only made it uh, only made it compulsory, only made it a law, only made it that so if you do not get married, you are only disobeying the Roman order and constitution. But now church became involved in the marriage, and church believed that, and church preached it that marriage is supposed to be a sacrament. It's a gift of gift from the Creator, and in doing so, waged a centuries-long struggle with the secular rulers of jurisdictions over it. Pope Alexander III definitely established that free consent alone, not parental approval, not consummation, created a valid marriage. This was revolutionary. It gave individuals at least equal power, conjugal fate. So Pope Alexander III said that you don't need the consent of you don't need your parents' approval to get married. Your approval alone can two people who are supposed to be married, and they have the consent to each other to be married. So as far as that is concerned, your marriage is valid. But the church believed that it was a sacrament. Uh, the direct quote is where there is no consent on both sides, there is no marriage. So the consent on the both sides became um, very important, and it's also remarkable in the history of that consent became that both people should approve the marriage and the union in the union they are getting into. Other famous philosopher, others. So these people, as I'm discussing, Pope Alexander III and the other that I'm and who are associated with the philosophy, church, and the marriage. These people are scholastic philosophers, and so that's something. Thomas Aquin, Aquinas synthesized Aristotelian natural law with a Christian theology in his account of marriage in the Summa Theologica. Marriage was natural, he argued, because human offspring required prolonged nurturing. Therefore, the stable bond between the parents was rational and divinely ordained. And Thomas Aquinas argued that two people should remain together because the offspring that is that that reproduce that is reproduces needs long-term nurturing, a prolonged nurturing, and that is very facilitated if two people are living together. Therefore, the stable bond between the parents was rational and divinely ordained. This naturalization of marriage served a dual um, political function. It legitimized church authority over conjugal life while making the authority seem merely descriptive of nature, which means that uh, it somehow gave legitimacy um, to the marriage, and the authority uh, came to the church. The artist Jane White's portrait, Arnold Finney portrait, and quotes the legal formalities of the Middle Flemish marriage that raised hand in its oath, of a dog of symbol of fidelity, the single candle of nuptial custom. Art historian Erwin Panesky read it as a marriage certificate in print, testimony to how deeply political and legal anxiety about marital wealth had penetrated visual culture, Reformation, Protestantism, and secular state. So now we are coming to to the Enlightenment era, and one of the famous theologian of Enlightenment era was Martin Luther, and Martin Luther struck the most decisive blow against the against the church's church control of marriage. In the Babylonian captivity of the church, he denied that the marriage was a sacrament at all, instead ins- insisting it was a worldly thing, properly governed by the secular authorities. For Luther, this was liberation from papal tyranny for the state. It was an invitation to colonize intimate life. Direct quote from him is, "Marriage is a civic matter. It is really not, thank God, a church matter or under the authority of the church." And he argued that there's nothing uh, uh, celestial about it. There's nothing godly or there's nothing heavenly about a marriage. It's just a contract between two people who think that they should live together, who and are more or less in the same condition, can uh, prosper, can be prosper in a union, and they are in a marriage. It's not anything, um, and thus it doesn't give any right to the church, or it it Martin Luther is to um, trying to make it more privatized, trying to make it more individualistic. So that's what he did. John Calvin, other famous theologian in Geneva, established courts to police marriage and sexual conduct, creating perhaps the first modern experiment in theory social engineering. The English Henry VIII's break with Rome was itself a marriage dispute, and the resulting Marriage Act of 1540 placed matrimony firmly under the parliamentary authority. The Reformation, in other words, did not depoliticize marriage; it transferred its politics from Rome to the nation state. So the story is that um, all the European states, all the European countries, and all the European empire were under the control of Rome, and the 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 control of Rome was under the control of Church, and the Church was under the control of the Pope. So every empire was under the control of the Pope, and they had to follow what was the constitution of the Church, or whatever they were preaching, or whatever they supposed was the uh, was the uh, was the established law. And Henry VIII wanted to marry somebody. So in order to do that, he first had to break a marriage with somebody, and then he married somebody else. He was not supposed to do that according to the law, and Pope categorically denied that you cannot do that. Hence came his break. Hence came the English Empire's break from the Roman Empire, or the Roman Church, or the Catholic Church, and that that gave the power of marriage, the authority over marriage, uh, not to the church anymore, but to the nation states. In this case, England, the United Kingdom. So now Enlightenment and Renaissance is at its peak, and the 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 famous the profound philosopher are debating marriage in their um, counterintuitively um, criticizing and analyzing marriage. The Enlightenment produced marriage for systematic secular critiques. John Locke, in Two Trustees of Government, 1689, argued that the marriage was a voluntary contract between consenting parties, not a divine ordinance, or not a permanent board. Crucially, he cautioned why the husband should hold sovereign authority in the household if the sovereignty in the state required consent. which means that he more or less speaking like Martin Luther, which is that it's not the business of church and it doesn't have anything divine in it. It's not celestial, heavenly, or anything else. It's just a contract, and two people are being in a union. Conjugal, the direct quote from John Locke from his work, The Second Trustees of Government. A conjugal society is made by a voluntary compact between man and woman, and is it being not necessarily to the ends of the society, that it should always be for life. Wollstone, Mary Wollstonecraft pressed the logic further. In a Vindication of Rights of Women, 1792, she argued that marriage as constituted was a form of legal slavery, rendering women economically dependent and politically invisible. Her critique was simultaneously philosophical and biological. She lived outside conventional marriage with William Godwin, who himself denounced the institution as most odious of all monopolies. And Godwin said that it is most odious of all monopoly. And Mary Wollston, Wollstonecraft said that it's a form of uh, degradation for women because it it it's something similar to what Simone de Beauvoir would have to say. And if you read and analyze the text of The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir, it's something what she says much later in 20th century. Uh, uh, John Rousseau presents the Enlightenment's contradiction in sharp relief in the social contract which theorized consent and equality. Immanuel Kant, in the Metaphysics of Morals, analyzed marriage with a characteristic rigor and mutual contract guaranteeing reciprocal lifelong possession of each other's sexual attribute, hardly romantic, but not but no but notable for its formal symmetry between the sexes. So, so as we are coming towards modern times, uh, marriage has to stand a lot of blows from the philosopher, from the political theorists, historians, and artists, and everybody's. And it nobody can see marriage now as nobody is deluded to see marriage as a happy union, and everybody is criticizing it. Everybody is being counterintuitive, being very um, um, in contradiction to it, and being very critical of it. If every artist, every most artists and most scholars, the painter William Hogarth's Hogarth's series Marriage a la Mode offered a visual Enlightenment critique, six satirical canvases depicting the destruction wrought by an arranged mercenary marriage between an earl's son and a merchant daughter. Hogarth made the political economy of marriage visible, titled Exchange for Money, Desire Crushed by Contract, with an irony that pamphlets the trustees could not match. The one direct quote from William Godwin from his inquiry concerning political justice: marriage, as at present constituted, is nothing more than a legal prostitution. It's one of the most controversial uh, direct quote from him, which is that which is very critical, very but that's what he has to say, that it's nothing more than a a loud um, uh, phenomena that somehow degrade individual. Nicholas de Condorcet went beyond Wollstonecraft in demanding full political equality for women, arguing in his essay on the admission of women to the rights of the citizenship 1790 that no rational basis existed for excluding women from civic life, and the marriage law enforcing their subordination was there for politically indefensible. The French Revolution briefly enacted some of his ideas. The Civil Constitution of 1791 made marriage a civil contract, and the divorce law of 1990 permitted dissolution on the grounds of incompatibility. The most liberal marriage legislation of Europe had yet seen subsequently reversed under Napoleon. So now it was made a law in 1991. In 1791, that marriage can be dissolved under on the grounds of incompatibility. If a woman thinks a marriage the man she is supposed to be with is not compatible, she can dissolve the marriage, which means a divorce. But it was later reversed under the leadership of Napoleon Bonaparte. Now let's look at modernity, nation states, and the Marriage Act. The 19th century witnessed a bureaucratization of marriage. Now, now as we have seen, we were being the transfer of property. The marriage took the form of transfer of property. Then marriage took the form of law. Then marriage became an individualistic thing. Then marriage came under the church authority. Then marriage was brought and went to nation states, and now the Marriage Act and modernity. Britain's Marriage Act of 1836 created a system of civil registration, extracting world record keeping from the church and placing it in the hands of the state. So now, um, when the Henry VIII broke the from the Catholic Church, and those rights went not to state directly, it went to the Church of England, and whatever denomination of Christianity were there, it went to them. But the Act of 1836 gave those powers to the state, particularly to the government, and they had the record keeping of marriage, what who married who and who married whom, and who divorced whom. The Married Women's Property Act 1817 and 1882 began dismantling curvature, the doctrine by which a wife's legal identity was subsumed into her husband's, establishing that women could hold property independently. So it was very revolutionary at the time, that it gave women a significant power. Uh, Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, in the Philosophy of Right, 1820, theorized marriage as an ethical foundation of a civil society, a free union that transcended mere contract but transformed union into a single moral personality. His account, influential throughout the century, cast the boson nuclear family as the natural mediator between the individual and the state. The direct quote from him is, uh, marriage is an immediate type of ethical relationship. Love, in its true sense, can only exist between a man and a woman. And he is trying to convey that the idea that as long as a woman and man live um, live in a relationship, and that relationship is supposedly ethical, that's the only form a love can take place. John Stuart Mill and Harry Taylor Mill offered its most incisive liberal critique in the subjugation of the women, and it was a very fundamental and revolutionary text at the time, that it discussed the subjugation of the women. And Mill argued that the legal marital inequality, a relic of conquest, non-consent, deformed both parties and corrupted the polity. Crucially, he linked marital reform to democratic theory. A society that tolerated domestic tyranny could not sustain political freedom. Now, other revolutionary text was Frederick Engels in The Origin of the Family, Private Property and the State, 1884 offered a materialist account. A monogamous marriage had reason to ensure the paternity of heirs and thus the transmission of property. Right? It was, yeah, the first class operation. The women of the proletarian of the house of the Marx framing would prove enormously influence on the 20th century feminism political. And Engels was a contemporary to Karl Marx. Actually, he was one of the early socialist thinker and philosopher who was working with Marx at the time and in um, trying to understand the structure of the society. And as marriage is part of the society, he challenged the thought. And now the politics of the person. The 20th century radicalized the critique. Simone de Beauvoir, in The Second Sex, analyzed marriage as the primary institution through which union was constituted as other, not uh, um, uh, not absolute, but relative to the absolute. It was other sex. It was not the sex. It was the other sex. Her identity defined entirely in relation to her husband. Marriage was not the fulfillment of femininity, but its annihilation. Marriage is the destiny traditionally offered to women by society. For the young girl, marriage is the only means of the integration in the community. Contemporary battlegrounds, same-sex marriage, and beyond. The late 20th century and the early 21st century saw marriage became as a central front with the socialist because now the new challenge for sociologists and the society is generally the same sex marriage where you put because we were long discussing the marriage, and for us marriage was we have defined the marriage and that was what marriage was, but we didn't thought that the marriage can take place another form which is same-sex marriage, and first it was to make it legal for two people to live together. First it was that first um, um, the fight was to make it the revolt was to make it cohabitation legal, and then the challenge was to make same-sex marriage um, same-sex marriage possible under the law of the state, and that's it happened in some countries, but it is yet to be done in other countries, and um, uh, there is there is actually efforts made to be to be for 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 to make same-sex marriage legal under the law and the state. Martha Nussbaum in From Disgust to Humanity developed liberal political philosophy against exclusionary marriage law, arguing that its justification rooted in the disgust rather than harm failed basic test of the political legitimation in the plural democracy. Her account drew on the traditional running from the law through mills to rods. Justice Anthony Kennedy, in conclusion, I would like to say from the from the early Greeks to the battles in the modern day national supreme courts around the world. Uh, it is well understood that marriage is not at all personal or private decision. It's very political. Who is supposed to marry whom and who cannot marry whom, and you know the way this marriage is in itself is very exclusive decision in itself when one takes one. takes this decision, takes it very explosively and so in it is political by the very nature of it. You don't even have to understand the history and the anthropology and the philosophy and the political theory and everything else. It by itself is the very nature of it is very political. And the history surveyed in this reveals a recurrent dialect, each attempt to naturalize or sacralize marriage, to place it beyond political con- um, so whatever understanding political theorists, historians, and philosophers had of marriage, um, they try to politicize it. And if they had anybody in the, if they were associated, and if they were associated anyway to the bureaucrats, it became a law. It became the the characteristic of the constitution of the state or an empire. So that's it.